So I've gotten a lot of requests to do sort of a video tour of this pavilion back here. So this is a Japanese inspired timber frame pavilion that I designed and built, and there it is. So it's a timber frame pavilion, meaning that there are very little screws in the entire frame. Most of it is mortise and tenon joinery. The only screws are from the rafters attaching to the rafter plates, and then obviously that decking, the roofing, and the flooring. The flooring also has screws to attach that. There's a way to do it without screws or nails. I'm not there yet. I didn't just, that's a lot of work. I didn't decide to do that on this one. I want to talk to you guys about some of the features and kind of what some of the things that make this structure unique compared to a typical Western timber frame. So one of the first things that people notice about this structure is that it's on stones. Yes, these posts are scribed exactly to the contour of these stones. So you have 3 on this side, and then you also have 3 on the other side. Underneath these stones are 2 feet of gravel. So it allows adequate drainage so that if there is a lot of water that comes through here and it does seep underneath the stone, to drain out. We did tamp the gravel before we set it on there, so it's about as compact as it can be. I understand that people are concerned with frost heave and kind of the settling of the gravel. Guys, it's a pavilion. I'm not extremely concerned about it, right? I do have another structure that is also on stone, and it hasn't moved. To do this is actually super easy. We actually teach it in our timber framing class. Students get to get a stone, put a post on top of it. You trace the contour of the stone, and then I use an angle grinder. Japanese have traditionally used chisels and gouges. I'll tell you, that just takes an incredible amount of time. This guy, each scribe on there takes roughly 20 to 30 minutes to get the actual contour, and then once you get that general shape, you bring it back to the stone, even out any contour issues that you have, and then you test fit it, 2 or 3 more times, and then roughly by the 3rd time, that contour is pretty nice, and then you'll have a pretty good fit on there. Now, that fit is not super perfect. You can't see it from where you are, but there's some gaps here. I know that there's some gaps in some of the other ones, but it's perfectly fine. These posts are sturdy, and they're not moving. You'll notice that it's burned. The burning is also going to discourage any bugs from getting in there. We've also covered it in pine tar, so that should also be a waterproofing measure that we did. One of the interesting things that we like to kind of tell folks is that all the structures in the world that are wooden structures that are older than 400 years are on stones. So we kind of took a page out of that and said, all right, fine, we'll put it on stones. People constantly ask, like, hey, why not just put it on concrete? I believe sandstone, but my understanding is that it does not harbor moisture. So in that junction right there, there should be no moisture in between the wood and the stone. So the wood is never actually going to rot or kind of get spongy or anything like that. So this connection right here should be stable as long as we help keep it dry. And that's going to be via gutters, large eaves, just kind of maintenance, right? Over the years, we may end up putting a little bit more pine tar on here, what have you. Anyway, that's enough about the scribe to stones. I love it. It looks beautiful. And I get constant questions from it. If you are more curious about it, Mr. Chickadee is a good resource for scribing stuff to stones, and he'd be happy to talk to you about why this method actually does work. The next thing you'll notice are going to be the square pegs. So let me show you a little bit closer in here. So this is the sill, and you can see this peg right here is a square. Let me take you around the other way. There it is. There is the square peg. So I love using square pegs because, well, if you've ever done any timber framing and well, for one, this peg has to go all the way through. Right, so that means that you have to either drill the hole from both sides or drill the hole from one side continuous to the other side. I will tell you that 9 times out of 10, that hole will not be perfect all the way through. What a surprise, right? So that's why I like doing square holes, because you get 2 shots to align that hole. So I drill the hole halfway, so into the mortise, and then I drill it from the other side into the mortise. And sometimes those holes align, sometimes they don't. But anyway, I have to chisel it out to be a square. So that's my chance to align those holes as best I can. And frankly, those holes, that mortise doesn't need to be perfect inside. Only the entrance needs to be just right? And obviously where it meets the tenon has to have some sort of relationship. We call it draw boring. So these pegs are actually perpetually tight because the hole from the tenon is actually offset by roughly 1/8 of an inch, just a couple millimeters or so. So this peg goes in and it kind of does like this banana shape. So yeah, it's holding that joint forever tight. And there's a specific direction in which to do it. Don't do it the other way, because then that means it'll be pushing the tenon out, and that's not a good day. Anyway, enough about this stuff. Right here we have what's called a Watariago joint. So you can see that the joist sits on top of the sill. Typically in Western timber frames, you're going to see kind of the sill be a 90-degree connection, and they're going to be at the same elevation, kind of at the corners. This one is not like that, right? You can see obviously that the joist sits on top of the sill. And what it is, it's kind of like a fancy half lap. So the joist looks something like this, and then obviously the sill is like this. But there's actually, the sill actually has kind of a seat cut into it. So it's not actually, this cut is not actually completely across like that. It actually comes in, comes back up like that, and like that. And if you download the plans, you'll see what I'm talking about. Just flip over to the sill page and you can see how it has that sort of step in it. It's a fancy joint. It's super, when it's done correctly and tight, it's a super durable and very strong joint. So anyway, I believe that's called a Watariago Nizu Hozo Shiguchi. And Shiguchi in Japanese joinery usually corresponds to a joint that is at 90 degrees. Enough of that. Let's go and move on to the next part. The next thing that you'll notice is I don't have any braces on this structure, and the reason for that is that I've used two things. One is a nuki, so that board that runs all the way across like that, that's actually a stabilizing board, and it acts like a bracing function in Japanese joinery. The other thing that I've done on so-called the bents, as it were, is this lower cord right here. So this is a parallel cord truss system, and essentially what it's doing is that the upper cord is in compression, so it's kind of bending outward like that, and then the lower one is in tension because it's bending like this, but it wants to pull from the outsides. So they kind of work hand in hand. That's why they're connected via these posts right here. It is a little bit more flexible than a Western frame. If you go on up to it, you can actually shake it just a little bit, but it springs back. And something very interesting, I've told you it's survived a couple windstorms, and you know, I'm always kind of looking out the window to see what it's doing, and it doesn't move. All right, so how are these nukis actually held up there? So let's see if we can get a little bit closer. So these nuki are actually held down by two cross wedges. So you'll see the wedge right there, and then on the other side right there. So let me see if I can get you guys closer. There it is. And you're specifically looking at the board, not the stuff in line over here. We'll talk about that in a second. So yeah, those are cross wedges, and when they meet up and they exert enough pressure that that board across that post and then across the other post is sufficiently rigid to provide the bracing function. Now, do those wedges outlast time? No, the answer is no, right? As the structure kind of has that flexibility in it, those wedges do end up getting crushed. But the great thing is that they're so exposed that they're easy to replace. And those are actually, they're yellow pine, as opposed to making those out of hardwood. If you made those out of hardwood, what would end up happening is that they would crush the nuki, that board itself. So then you'd have to replace the board. But if you make the wedges out of yellow pine, it's softwood, and so those are the first things to get destroyed if you do have some sort of seismic activity or a heavy windstorm. I haven't had any issue with that, but frankly, this structure has only been up for 4 or 5 months, something like that. Okay, so on these parallel cords, you saw those keys that were hanging down. So let me show you guys a little bit closer. All right, so right there. So those keys that are hanging down right there. Let's see, maybe this guy right here. There we go. So they're all the same. So those keys that are hanging down right there, that's called a loose tenon connection. And on the other side of there, let's see if I can show you what's going on. Yep, there it is. Okay, so you can see that board or the tenon kind of comes out the other side of the post. And that piece is not actually connected to this beam. So this tenon from here to here is independent of any other piece that's going on there. So it has these vertical keys. They're just squares, or not squares, they're rectangles. Right, so let's get in there. That's what it looks like that. And then on the other side, we have a wedge. So that hardwood wedge actually pulls that tenon out and makes the connection even tighter. So I don't know, it's kind of aesthetically pleasing. I like to see the joinery exposed as much as I can, and that was one way that I designed it, so that you could kind of look up and be like, oh wow, there's something different going on there. So that's kind of neat. And then we'll see if we can get into the overheads, but kind of up there we have some of the scarf joints that I like to use. And then you could see that Watariago show up again. So here we have this design right here. This is what makes this design classify under what's called orioki gumi. So you have a post, you have what's called an anchor beam, or kind of a tie beam. So this piece that goes like this, that's referred to as an anchor beam. Western framing would probably be a tie beam. And then on top of that, you have the rafter plate. So that plate right there, you can see the rafters are actually sitting on top of the rafter plate. Okay, so once again, ori okigumi. And the way that this works is that the post has a tenon that penetrates those two pieces. So it comes in at roughly 4 or 4.5 inches wide, penetrates through this anchor beam, but then it has to change direction because the rafter plate sits on top of that. So it actually goes from 4 inches like this, and then it goes down to 30 millimeters. So that's another cool thing about this, is that all the joinery on here is done using 30 millimeter tenons. And it's 30 millimeters because the tool that you use to lay everything out is this guy. So this is a Japanese square, and it's 15 millimeters wide. So it's actually very functional when using a certain method of layout. So the method that I used is called centerline layout. So on every single one of these guys, you're going to see a black line. So that black line right there, those are snap lines that I've made from each side of the post. So if you're interested in it, there's another video that I have that kind of talks about centerline layout. Essentially what you do with this square is that you put it on one side of the line, make your mark, and then put it on the other side of the line, make your mark. And that's the thickness of both the mortise and the tenon. Anyway, talking about the Watariago joint, that's how it works, is that tenon starts off at 4 inches, comes down to 30 mil, and it's 30 mil thick, 30 mil square, essentially. So here's a different joint that I wanted to talk about. It's called shirobasami sugi. It's a scarf joint, and it's this guy right there. So you could see those wedges that are coming out, those two pieces that are kind of odd lengths right there. They're actually cross wedges. So this scarf joint is roughly 15 inches long, maybe 17 inches, I can't remember. But it is typical kind of rule of thumb for these scarf joints is 3 to 5 times the length. And I decided just to go with 3 because it's, it's a small enough piece. It's not, I think it was going to do the job, right? The span between these two posts is roughly 6 feet, so it didn't really need to transfer that much load. And so shirobasami sugi is kind of a unique scarf joint compared to kind of Western joints. Western scarf joints, you're going to see them oriented like this. So the flat faces are going to be kind of horizontal, whereas this one, the flat faces are completely vertical. And the reason for that is that if this joint is made correctly and tight, what's actually bearing a lot of its strongest orientation is going to be vertical. And that's because there's a lot of end grain on both of the ends, and then the cross wedges also help to maintain the structural integrity of that joint. Also, those cross wedges are white oak. So if there is anything that's going to get compressed, it's going to be the yellow pine before the white oak gives way. So anyway, I put as many scarf joints as I could into this structure. The other scarf joint that I put in here is this guy right here. This is on the Jimuni beam, and this is called daimochi sugi. And it's essentially just a fancy, simple scarf joint. There's frankly nothing holding that scarf joint from coming apart, just like unlike shirobasami sugi, the one right behind me. Daimochi sugi is actually very good for kind of a shear function. Anyway, But I did kind of take some precautions with this because you'll see these wedges that kind of stick out the bottom right there. And I did that on all these posts. So you could see that connection is Watariago, Nizuhozo Shiguchi right there. But I wasn't 100% certain that this was not going to come apart. So if I did have any lift, I didn't want those pieces to kind of fly away. So what I ended up doing was I made the vertical post kind of the opposite of what's going on the exterior 6 posts. So I ended up, let me see if I can get you guys a little bit closer in there. You could see what's going on there is that tenon comes all the way down, and then I wedged it on either side with white oak. So yeah, that's one way of capturing the tenon. And as I was driving, those guys are in there pretty tight. And also, when I was driving them in there, you could actually visually see the yellow pine getting compressed. So to get those out, you're probably going to have to pull out the white oak wedges, which is going to be a fun day if anybody ever decides to do that. Hopefully not me. Anyway, the last thing I'd like to talk about is what this other thing is going on here, right? So I called that the jimuni, and that's kind of in Japanese frames, that's kind of the spinal cord of the frames. So it's been described to me as kind of like a fish, and then the bents are kind of the rib cages. So the jimuni is connected across all 3 bents from front to back, and yeah, it's another method of preventing any sort of racking. And then of course, then you have those small vertical posts, which are almost like king posts, and then you have your ridge beam. And on the ridge beam, I also have a shirobasami sugi scarf joint on the opposite side. So I've staggered the scarf joints. I did the exterior ones on this side, and then I did the ridge beam one on the opposite side of this bent. So is it actually necessary? I'm not sure. I don't think so, but it gives me a little bit of peace of mind. Anyway, if you're curious or ever want to build something like this, we do have the plans for free. Just ask us for them and we'll drop you the link, or it'll probably be in the description. Anyway, I hope that answers some of the questions that you guys have been having and kind of walks you through a little bit more detail of this structure. It's a super neat design. Once again, I didn't really come up with this. This is been taught to me by Mr. Chickadee, and then looking up all those sort of Japanese architecture and timber frame stuff. But if you do have any questions, please feel free to ask. I'll do my best to answer them.